Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a fascinating piece of history that literally carved up the world. We all know about Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, right? Well, that voyage kicked off a frantic race between Spain and Portugal to claim new lands. Just 2 years later, in 1494, they signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. This treaty drew a line down the Atlantic Ocean, giving Spain the rights to new lands west of the line, and Portugal the rights to lands east of it. Simple enough, right? But there was one massive globe-sized problem they didn't foresee. The world is round. What happens when you extend that line all the way around the globe? Where does it meet on the other side? This question became a huge deal a few decades later, specifically in Southeast Asia, around a group of islands we now call the Maluku Islands, or the Moluccas. Back then, they were known as the Spice Islands, and they were the world's only source of nutmeg and cloves. In the 16th century, these spices were worth more than their weight in gold. Control the Spice Islands, and you control a massive source of wealth. Both Spain and Portugal desperately wanted them. Portugal, sailing east around Africa, reached the Spice Islands first in 1512. They set up forts and started trading, but then along came Ferdinand Magellan's expedition. Magellan, a Portuguese explorer sailing for Spain, was convinced he could reach the Spice Islands by sailing west, proving they fell on the Spanish side of the Tordesillas line. In 1521, his expedition, after a brutal journey across the Pacific, finally reached the region. Even though Magellan himself died in the Philippines, his surviving crew made it to the Spice Islands, loaded up on cloves, and one ship, the Victoria, eventually made it all the way back to Spain, completing the first circumnavigation of the globe. This incredible feat proved the world was round, but it also reignited the conflict. Spain now had a claim, based on Magellan's voyage, that the Spice Islands were in their half of the world. Portugal, having been there for a decade, vehemently disagreed. Both nations sent fleets to the area, and for years they skirmished and fought for control. It was a messy, confusing, and expensive conflict happening on the other side of the planet. The problem was, nobody in Europe knew the exact longitude of the Spice Islands. Cartography was still a developing science, and measuring longitude accurately was incredibly difficult. Each country produced maps that, surprise, surprise, showed the islands falling squarely within their own territory. They held meetings, called juntas, where astronomers, cartographers, and navigators from both sides would argue for days, presenting their conflicting data and maps. Imagine a 16th century version of a heated international summit, but with astrolabes and parchment instead of laptops and PowerPoint. These meetings, held in the cities of Badajoz and Elvas, ended in a total stalemate. Neither side would budge. The constant fighting and the financial drain were becoming too much for the Spanish monarch, Emperor Charles V. He was a busy guy, ruling a vast empire that included Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, and parts of Italy and the Americas. He was fighting wars in Europe, dealing with the Protestant Reformation, and frankly, the distant conflict over some small islands, however valuable, was a headache he didn't need. Plus, he was about to marry Isabella of Portugal, and he needed a hefty dowry to fund his other imperial ambitions. It was a classic case of needing cash, and needing it now. So, in 1529, pragmatism won out over pride. On April 22nd, in the Spanish city of Zaragoza, the two nations signed a new treaty, the Treaty of Zaragoza. This treaty established a second line of demarcation, an anti-meridian, on the opposite side of the world from the Tordesillas line. This new line was set at 297.5 leagues, or about 1,163 kilometers east of the Moluccas. In exchange for this, Spain agreed to sell its rights to the islands and the surrounding area to Portugal for the very handsome sum of 350,000 gold ducats. It was essentially a massive real estate deal. Spain gave up its claim to the Spice Islands in exchange for a huge pile of cash. Interestingly, the Zaragoza line was actually a bit of a fudge. Based on the best geographical knowledge available at the time, the islands probably did lie within the Spanish hemisphere according to the original Tordesillas agreement. But Spain needed the money more than they needed the spices, or at least more than they needed the continued cost of fighting for them. Portugal, on the other hand, already had a well-established trade route and presence in the region, so for them, paying to secure their monopoly was a worthwhile investment. The treaty effectively gave Portugal control over most of Asia and the Indian Ocean that they had already explored. But wait, there's a twist in the story. What about the Philippines? Magellan's expedition had claimed them for Spain in 1521. Technically, under the Treaty of Zaragoza, the Philippines also fell on the Portuguese side of the new line. For a while, Spain didn't press the issue, but in 1565, decades after the treaty was signed, Spain sent another expedition, led by Miguel López de Legazpi, to colonize the Philippines. They established a permanent settlement in Cebu and later founded Manila. Portugal, which was dealing with its own issues and had never established a strong presence in the Philippines, protested, but their protests were weak. Spain just ignored them. Why did Spain do this? Well, by the 1560s, Spain was a global superpower, flush with silver from the Americas. They saw the Philippines not just as a source of resources, but as a crucial strategic base. It allowed them to trade directly with China, tapping into the lucrative market for silk and porcelain. They established the famous Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, where galleons laden with Chinese goods would sail from the Philippines to Mexico, and the goods would then be transported overland and shipped to Spain. This trade route became a cornerstone of the Spanish Empire for over 250 years. Portugal was in no position to challenge Spain's might by this point, and so the Philippines remained a Spanish colony for over 300 years, an exception to the neat lines drawn by the Treaty of Zaragoza. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The Treaty of Zaragoza, along with the Treaty of Tordesillas, represents one of the most audacious moments in human history. Two European nations literally drew lines on a map and divided the entire planet between themselves, with no regard for the people who already lived in these lands. It was the ultimate expression of colonial ambition. The treaty shows us how economic desires, in this case, the lust for spices and gold, drove global politics and exploration. It also highlights the limitations of knowledge at the time and how pragmatic financial decisions could override claims of discovery and exploration. It's a story of ambition, conflict, negotiation, and the messy, often illogical way that history unfolds. The lines they drew have long since vanished, but their legacy shaped the world we live in today, influencing the languages, cultures, and borders of nations from South America to Southeast Asia. Thanks for sticking with me through that epic journey around the globe. It's a complex but incredibly important story. If you found this interesting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was it a fair deal, or did Spain get ripped off? See you in the next video.